Thanks for listening to the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. You can contact the show at twitter.com/DW Groovecast and through Facebook at facebook.com/Drummers Weekly Groovecast.
Good evening.
I am warning you right now, if you touch my drums, I will stab you in the neck with a knife.
Ain't it funky? Ain't it funky?
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
Everything get straightened out?
No, we had a problem. I mean, we tried to do everything we could.
What do you mean?
Well, you know what I mean.
Next!
Little trouble there. You're rushing.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Yeah!
John, how you doing, buddy?
Doing good, thanks.
Oh, my keen-eared listeners out there, they can recognize that's not the normal John that's on the microphone over there.
No, it's not.
Well, folks, the cat is out of the bag here. Today, we're going to have a special guest sitting in here at the Drummers Weekly Groovecast. It is not John Chalden that's sitting across from me, but it is another John that has an H in his name that has been mentioned on this show several times before. This fella that's sitting across from me is one of Atlanta's first call percussionists and is one of the stellar percussion teachers in the South. And he happens to be a neighbor of mine. And coincidentally, what do you live, John? About a quarter of a mile away? Half a mile away? Yeah, something like that. So I want everyone to give a large Groovecast welcome to the wonderful, flawless John Lawless.
Hello.
Man, that's all you can give me
I don't know, man. Thanks, Phil.
After I gave you that warm welcome.
You're awesome. Thank you.
Oh, well, you know, I do what I can, John.
You know how I have you on my phone, actually, as Felonious.
Oh, you do?
Smith. I do, yeah, from the beginning.
That actually makes me feel pretty good, man.
I swear, I could show it to you. But yeah, you've been Felonious since probably the week I met you.
So that's like mid-90s then I've been Felonious. And I have you as John Law. I'll have to change it to Flawless after that. So, folks, what I thought we would do today is John and I are going to talk to you about and have a conversation about many of the gigs that we've done in the past where I've been called to play drum set, John has been called to play percussion. We have to share a pit together, and sometimes we have to share a recording studio together. And there are some things that are probably worth speaking and talking about and learning about regarding how we work together, how we practice together, how we do things together where we don't step on each other's toes. Everything from loading in and loading out to figuring out what parts we're going to play. So I think it's a good thing to go ahead and broach this topic when I got my buddy who lives, like I said, a half a mile down the road from me. Hadn't been on the show yet. It's amazing, man. You live a half mile away and hadn't been on the show yet. But I thought that's what we would do. And I think one of the best things to start out with is probably the Broadway shows that we've done, the bus and truck stuff that we've done, because that is probably the highest stress stuff that we've done with the largest volume of material that we've had to work on. Mm-hmm. John, let's start with talking about our initial preparation for this, because it's worth noting to people who've never done this before that even though this is a major production that's coming in, that the majority of the time they run on a fairly tight budget. So even though you might have 3 hours of sometimes challenging music in front of you, that a lot of times you don't have, maybe you might have twice that amount in rehearsal. You might have 6 hours of rehearsal before you have to play that first show. So traditionally when we do these shows, I know that we get a little bit in advance, maybe like 3 weeks in advance, 2 weeks in advance. They will send us a practice book.
Right.
John, what do you do when you get ready to start working on one of these shows, when they basically send you a yellow pages in the mail?
Yeah, true. That's a luxury to get it that far in advance. And I know, to back up just a moment, one of the first big shows I ever did, and I think back on it now, I'd love to re-experience some of the things that I've done in my early percussive life. now, because I would so much more appreciate and be so prepared for it. One of the first big shows was Camelot, and it was the big one, Richard Harris coming through town.
Yeah.
Scott Douglas, the normal guy in the pit with the Fox, was unable, so I got the call. And I had to amass all the equipment. The list was unbelievably large, but there was no music. Music came for the first rehearsal. Period. We didn't get it ahead of time. So for Camelot, my call was drum set. There was only one perk that played everything. So drum set, xylophone, bells, chimes, various cymbals, timpani. So I had like 2 truckloads of junk that I brought into the Egyptian ballroom, not knowing yet what the music looked like. I loaded in. And then the guy shows up with the case of books. And I had things set up orchestrally. So being an early show guy, I had a drum set with every tom I owned set up, all the cymbals, everything. Next to that, timpani. Next to that, xylophone. Next to that, bells. You get the point. Next to that, chimes. Next to that, blah, blah, blah. So from the moment I saw the book, I started feeling like, oh my gosh, this is not going to work. And we're 30 minutes from a downbeat at that point. So, I was like trial by fire, man. First thing on that book is a forte piano timpani roll going into a cymbal crash. Missed that. Had a little bell lick, bum, beam, bum, beam, but up, I missed that because it was like 9 feet away. Ran back for the second timpani, and it just must have looked like the most hilarious thing I've ever seen. And I finally amassed stuff and came up with a setup, just because of necessity that worked. That to this day I will use this setup. For that one I put the bass drum underneath the xylophone so I could hit that while I'm playing. Timpani right beside it, bells over the xylophone. Now it makes ergonomic sense. Then I was dying, and it wasn't really my fault because the book wasn't there ahead of time.
Sure.
So really, you're just like thrown right into the pit of lions, and they're just chomping at you while you figure this moment out in a survival mode. So that was my beginning. Ended up being one of the most fun things I've ever done. I think back on that with Richard Harris. 10 feet away doing his Camelot routine, and there I am sitting in the pit like, oh, this is like the coolest thing ever. And as you know, some of the pit stuff is, the Broadway stuff is just some of the most fun you can have.
Yeah.
But when you get 3 weeks like we did on that, then you can really start to figure out, I have to build this, and I have to get a special rack for that so it'll fit into this little moment. And you also have to figure out how much space you're going to be allowed in the Fox Theater pit or whichever pit you're in. That's a whole nother scene right there, because you're not going to be palatial. Your room is not going to be spread out like, I'll put this right over there. You're tight. And if you've done enough shows now, you want to be on one music stand, baby. You want to have everything readable. You don't want to move that book one time. You want to turn a page.
Right.
And move a book. The other side of the coin with that was Light in the Piazza. You didn't get to be on that one, but that was the most incredible percussion book ever. And I was in a massive circle. There's marimba vibes, drum kit. There's 4 timpani. There's chimes. There's 3 different gongs. And I literally had to read off of 5 different books because they had to be placed, all around this pit. Literally played all the timpani back to the conductor, watching a monitor, even though he's, 20 feet away, completely back too. But those books were all organized as far as page turns. So while you're playing one, you're turning the other one. So when you get there, you're ready to rock. Crazy stuff.
That's
crazy stuff.
I was going to say, that's a ballet of page turning.
It is.
Right
and
there.
You miss one, you're done. That's the way it is.
I understand that. One thing that I recall, that when we did Ragtime, that it was such an enormous percussion setup. I believe that just between yourself and myself, we had about a third of that pit commandeered, man.
Totally.
Because you had at least 2 temps, if not 3.
There may have been 3 for that one.
Yeah.
Xylo bells. Remember the 2 washboards on either side of the xylophone for the rooftop scene?
Right. And when you had chimes on
chimes
that
were
thing
in there.
too.
Yeah, I'm not
chimes.
sure the Crotales were in that one. I think they might have been.
That was in Titanic for sure. The Crotales.
They were definitely in Titanic, but I want to say that they were on the side of the xylo with that setup.
They may have been.
Back at it.
Man, I know that I probably played at least half a dozen different wind sound effects. Man, I had whistles and sirens and bird calls and all kinds of bizarre stuff that I played on that one. Yeah. Now, John, talking about getting the music a little bit ahead of time, okay? I want to talk about Titanic for a second because I still refer to this one part as the bane of my existence. Do you remember the infamous Glinka?
You know what? I see that Glinka, and that's actually a composer that you've referenced here. Well, I don't remember Glinka. Was it actually a moment in the?
It was a recurring moment that happened at least half a dozen times during set changes and scene changes.
Okay.
And it was the fastest triangle part on the face of the planet. Do you remember that, man? Where I had to do this, I had to play this alternating triangle part. And my point on why I'm even bringing this up is that the first thing that I do when I get a massive volume of music like that, first thing that I do is I go through and I look for what I call the hot spots.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so that Glinka showed up, and you can look at the tempo on it, and then you look back at it and you go, wait a minute, can that be right? And for what you have to do and for the length of time you have to play it, that sort of thing. So in every type of show that you end up doing or musical performance, there's always going to be the proverbial hot spot. Mm-hmm. When you get your book, do you do the same thing? And
I do.
And how do you find and kind of highlight those hot spots?
For me, the hot spots can also be, holy cow, I don't have that instrument yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like for me, when I get a book like that, I first go through it, or at least the listing of instruments, and think, check. At this point in my life, unless it's just completely funky, I have it. Mm-hmm. I have it. I had a buddy call me the other day, hey man, do you have an anvil? I said, and my only answer to him back on the text was, Mike, I have everything, and you know it. What do you need?
Better yet, which kind of anvil do you want?
I gave him a couple choices, and they're using it now. But you have to amass all this stuff. So the first thing I do is I look to see, do I have everything I need? Do I have the appropriate sound for what they're asking for? Do I need to go to Lowe's or Home Depot and build the next thing that I'm going to build, which is also more than fun, as you know.
Sure.
But then I'll find hotspots. So once I'll usually, when I'm doing shows, and I haven't done one in a little while now, I'd love to do some more, just to keep that going, man. Same as you probably. It's like there's so much fun when you're in the heat of battle. They're great gigs. Once you're up and running, then you get to walk in. You're not even carrying sticks. You just walk in, and your stuff is all there. But I will literally set my studio at home with that show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because every show's different. You'll need to get familiar with all of your setups with that. So that may be once I figure out I have the instruments and I find the hot spots, as you call them, then I'll carve my studio into that setup if given the amount of time. Of course, obviously Camelot, there's no chance for any kind of prep or rehearsal or even looking at notes until you're actually getting a downbeat from the conductor. So when it's 3 weeks out and you're not prepared, you're on a frying pan. You know what I mean? They expect you to walk in ready to know every single note, because we're beyond learning notes at that point, right? It's like It's showtime. And by the way, we open tonight. Oh, okay. Because most shows hit on Tuesday, they open Tuesday night. Right?
That's exactly right.
I mean, that's it. And usually, as you remember, your rehearsal's in a different space.
Yeah, you have to do a move.
So you're not even comfortable with your setup in the rehearsal space. And then, of course, you're in the Fox situation, you might be 6 floors up. I forget what show it was I played. I don't think it was one that I got to do with you. But the day I showed up to load in, it was a big one, man. Maybe Beauty and the Beast. It was a big one. The elevators in the Fox were broken. Oof. And we were on the 6th floor, that little dingy room up there.
Yeah.
I had timpani. I had every board I owned up there. And then, of course, we did all the rehearsals there and then had to move down the flight of stairs again into the pit. And then we opened that night. I don't think I've ever been as tired physically, mentally, emotionally as after that show opening night closed. I just wanted to just fall.
I can't even fathom what it's like taking a set of chimes down 6 flights of stairs.
Yeah, you can. Come on, you can.
It's not going to be fun. Those things are unwieldy. Those things are even hard to roll a lot of times, much less actually take them down 6 flights of stairs.
Right, that's the kind of thing. I own a full rack of chimes, and it's like when somebody asks me, I just very reluctantly go, yeah, I've got a set of chimes. You don't want to hear, can you bring them?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. But timpani, imagine that flight of stairs, 6 floors up with my drums. You've seen my timpani. They're what Mark uses down at Symphony Hall. It's the same beast. But you're talking dragging it up, and I got stair climbers, but you're talking 6 flights of stairs, stair climbers with 4 drums. to get into a small room.
Yeah, those stair climbers are meant to go up a couple of stairs, not 6 flights. Yeah. So, John, you made another great point that I want to talk about, a little solution that I encourage everyone to do. And that is, you were talking again about the absolute importance for us as percussionists and drummers to have the proper ergonomic setup. Well, going through those books, one of my hot spots that I always check off are places where you've got to make a quick change. Sure. You got to get from this place to this, and you've literally got 2 beats, right, to go from one thing to the next, if you're lucky. Right. Well, when I was working on one of those shows, I was looking through and I was looking for the changes, and I was thinking, how in the world am I going to make it from doing this drum set part to all of a sudden dropping these sticks and getting over and being able to play this bell part, this orchestra bell part? And so what I ended up doing was I contacted the original Broadway drummer for that show, called him up right on the phone. And I happened to know a guy who was doing a lot of Broadway shows at that time. And I just called him up and I said, do you know who the drummer is for this show? And he goes, absolutely, it's this guy. And I said, man, I'm going to call this guy up because I got to play his show. And he's going to know how to get this set up. So basically, if you have any questions, or for even that much, even if you don't have any questions and you are curious to how you're going to set things up to where you can get from one instrument to another, I say don't hesitate. Try to go ahead and reach out and contact those guys, because the first guy that I did reach out to for Titanic, not only did he tell me how to do it, this guy was nice enough to actually sketch out like a stage plot. He scanned it and emailed it to me.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that is invaluable stuff when you're trying to figure out a way to make things happen and you're just not sure how it's going to work. So that's my first big bit of advice to everyone, is if you've got some questions, most of these guys who have done this stuff before are sweethearts. They'll just come right out and go, look, you just need to do this and everything's going to be okay.
Well, and nowadays, I mean, we all have access to internet. Back when we were doing these shows, it was kind of looking up your answer online. You know, you had to kind of, when I started doing, you had to just create, make your own thing happen. I remember doing one show. It might have been one with you, man. It might have been Ragtime. There was a lick it was a xylophone lick going into a timpani roll. So you had this boom, and there's a timpani roll there. So it's like, you're not going to get one stick that sounds good for that and that, right? So I'm thinking, oh, come on. This has got, so I remember early, the first time I did the pass, I tried something, it didn't work well. And I remember the conductor said to me, she goes, don't worry about the last part of that xylophone lick. You know, go digga 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 and leave off da 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 dum. And I want that timpani roll.
That's the technical term.
I said okay. I said okay. And I said, but I'm curious. And this is that moment in the rehearsal where we're trying to figure everything out. I said, has anyone been able to do it? You know, because it's there. It's written on the part. And she said, well, Chicago did it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there's your gauntlet. So I'm like, okay, all right. So on the fly, I just absolutely took gaff tape, because I mean, this is on the fly, and I taped a timpani mallet, and on the other side was my xylophone mallet.
This
right?
was Ragtime.
It was. You remember that? It felt a little goofy in my hands, but by God, I went left hand, dum, and then the left hand coming down that last part of the scale, dum, boom. And then by the time I hit the note on the timpani, I flipped the other mallet around and did the roll. And the moment I hit that thing, she looked down and she when she cut, she goes, and now Atlanta. That's what she said. I'm like, yeah.
Well, you know, not to toot the horn literally of the Atlanta musicians, but I know that when we've done those shows before, every time that when we finished up, the conductors have made a point to come up and say, you guys down here, you guys know what you're doing.
Right.
That's a very nice thing to say as a collective.
Seen everything.
Yeah, you know, you got a collective group of musicians that you know that are good. Right. But then all of a sudden, you know, when you have somebody come in and say, hey, you guys sound as good as Chicago or Cleveland, or, you know, it's just like, hey, man, all right, you sound like LA.
Trying.
We're like, we're trying, man, you know? Yeah, absolutely. Now, John, another thing that I've done, and I'm not sure if you've done this before, but to me it's tremendously helpful primarily for tempos, is if I've got a few weeks, I will also try to go out and grab the original cast recordings of those discs.
Absolutely.
Because you know as well as I do that you've got to be, as a percussionist and a drum set player, dead on right from the get-go, man.
Right.
When that stick falls, boom, you're there. There's no count-ins on any of this stuff.
Those recordings, those guys have already fixed everything.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a world premiere at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you can use those recordings to get you in the ballpark of how those things are supposed to feel and sound tempo-wise, you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Absolutely. And you know what I use those recordings for, felonious, is getting from point A to point B. You know what I mean? It's
Practice
not
along
just
with
practice
it.
here, practice there. You practice in real time, you know, and you make that switch from timpani to bells to suspended cymbal to, right? So all those loose ends then connect when you're trying to play along real time with the recording. Yeah. And that's absolutely priceless. You have to do that.
Right. And, you know, I think it's also worth mentioning now that you have to understand, if you haven't played one of these shows before, that there can be periods of time inside an act where you are literally playing for 20 or 25 minutes without a stop.
Right.
You know, so you have to be ready to go from instrument to instrument, from piece to piece, song to song, segueing everything, and be able to make those tempo changes, because it's the time is very fluid according to what's going on the stage, which is behind you, which unless you have a monitor, you don't know what's happening.
Right. You might get one word for your cue.
Correct.
And you're in.
And then all of a sudden, you know, oh my gosh, the dancers up on the stage had a little too much to drink last night. We got to slow this one down just a little bit once we get into it. So it's kind of one of those things that you've got to really be on your toes. You got to know, of course, you know, where you're going with these tempos, with the feels of these things, but yet be pliable enough to be able to kind of push and pull with them, because they, of course, do give the people who are on the stage the benefit of the doubt.
That's right.
And then one last thing, John, I want to talk about in the preparation aspect of this before we actually start talking properly about rehearsals, because that's another whole topic, is that naturally when you have a big old book that's sent to you in the mail and you're working on something, if you're a conscientious fellow, you want to try to absolutely get to all of it, and you should get to all of it. But the one thing I always constantly tell all my students is not everything is weighted equally in those books. That when you get to the proverbial hot spots, when you get to the places where you have to make these quick instrument changes, make sure you practice the stuff that needs practicing, so to speak. It might be fun, man. Yeah, playing this nice groove on this one part of this song that lasts, 4.5 minutes. But there's that 8 seconds of sheer terror where you have to play a 64th note lick that goes into a timpani roll like you're talking about. That make sure you practice that stuff numerous times. Right. Because that's the kind of stuff that, even though you know that, man, this is a defining moment in my, ability to play this stuff. Again, you get into rehearsals, that's just on you. The clarinets have got that same defining piece somewhere else in the show. Everybody, everybody would like to run that one part over and over again, but it's just not feasible from a time standpoint. So really make sure that as a percussionist and a drummer, that you are really practicing the stuff that needs to be practiced, because you're not going to get it but just that once or maybe twice.
Right. And then you'll get it 8 more times, but that's all shows.
Yeah, and you want to have it down by then, man. You don't want to get the stink eye from your conductor. Because we've seen the stink eyes before, man. We don't want to have that.
Gosh, I remember missing a cymbal crash. It was that early show. I was talking about Camelot, and I'll never forget. You can't curse on this thing, can you?
Of course you can.
Can you? Okay, so I'll kid glove it. But I remember missing. I had the cymbal. I finally got my setup all figured out for this, and I remember at one point there was a timpani thing, and then it came off into a crash cymbal, and my cymbal was too far away. And this is still like a little bit of the rehearsal. And the actually sound check. So we were opening that night as a sound check, and I did the timpani roll. It was beautiful. I thought, I'm proud of that. And of course, right into a cymbal, which I didn't have. And this guy stopped. He was English. And I made the mistake of smiling at him. That smile to me meant, I know I missed that cymbal, and you can count on me to hit it tonight. And he says, I don't need your GD smile. What I need now is a cymbal. And I was like, So I tried to stop smiling, like, oh my God. And I just nodded, no problem. So that night, of course, I had cymbals freaking everywhere.
Yeah.
They were, I could have hit it, with my eyelash at that point. Because, and of course, then when I hit the cymbal that evening, he smiled and did his eyebrows up and down, like, yeah, nice. I knew you could get it. But, that moment of like sheer, like, don't smile at me, play your cymbal. You know what I mean? That's where you don't want to be, right?
Exactly.
That's where you don't want to be. So,
Exactly.
anyway, all's well. But
so now we get to the point of getting ready to do that first rehearsal, the first run through, sometimes the only run through.
yeah, well, yeah.
Now, the first thing I want to bring to everyone's attention is that 99% of the time, you're going to be bringing as much or more gear to one of these venues as that you will bring ever to any other gig.
Oh, no question.
Right?
Yeah. Crazy for you, or not crazy. Light in the Piazza was 3 full vans. So I had to negotiate that time frame.
Yeah.
If we're lucky enough to get it into one van, lucky be it. But yeah, you're
Sure.
right. Everything you own sometimes.
So I think the first thing I want to impress upon everyone, and this goes under the no duh category, is you...
Sexy vehicles, you mean?
Right, yeah. Is that you better budget for a significant amount of time. Because the other thing is, a lot of times these venues, like you already discussed, it's not the easiest place to load in and out.
Right.
And so you better really err on the side of caution on that.
Yeah, the percussionist and drum set, you guys can fit your rig into a Honda Fit. I've seen a bunch of you guys do it, which cracks me up. The sexiest thing I will ever drive is a van, man. And I've resorted to that. I knew that from the beginning, and that's just the way it's going to be. Because, that's the only option I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I've always had a van, from day one. And I know that's what I have to have.
De facto van with timpani. I mean, there's just no other way.
Duh. Right.
Right. So, but I know that you and I have had to do a few pretty challenging load ins and load outs from the standpoint of negotiating, of course, getting in and out of different venues. I know there was one time that we played at the Fox where we did a rehearsal. It was in the front of the building. And I had to load in from Peachtree Street.
Right. Absolutely. Right.
And for anybody who's unaware of Atlanta and Peachtree Street, think of Broadway in Manhattan is what it's like.
Right under the marquee.
Yeah, under.
That's the Egyptian ballroom, man.
Right.
And you load right in there.
You've got to make that weird load in to where you're double parking on the road. And
making everybody angry.
Yeah.
Yep.
So again, like I said, really do your homework from the standpoint of the logistical aspect of where you're going to load into this place, and then budget way more time than you ever need.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Had I not budgeted 3 hours when those Vaders were down, been no chance, man. No chance I could have ever made a downbeat. But I had the 3 hours. Here's another one. I know we're bouncing around. When I did the big show with Westside, Cubby O'Brien was drumming.
Right, sure.
That was unbelievable. A guy named Donald Chan was the conductor. Amazing conductor. But I had set for 3 hours. Got all that. If anybody that's played Westside Story, it's a book. Both drum set but the percussion book is a lot of real estate. And I was absolutely at the side of the Fox pit, as tight as I could be there, and I pushed out from there and had my consolidated setup. And I'll never forget, and this guy was a great player. I do not recall his name. The touring lead trumpet player walks in and sits down 15 minutes before the actual downbeat. I'd been there for now 3.5 hours, most likely. And he looked back at me and he says, "Hey, bro, can you give me about 6 inches here?" He was serious. Can I move my crap back 6 inches? And I'm usually pretty cordial, man. You know me.
John's very cordial.
I said, no. I didn't even crack a smile. I said, no. He said, no, seriously. I just 6 inches. I said, man, I've been setting this stuff up for 3 hours. And I'm as tight as I can be. No. And he got all kind of weird and huffy, but he had plenty of room. He just wanted to just stretch out a little bit, like...
He literally wanted to flex his muscles a bit.
Bro, can you give me 6 inches? I wanted to give him a knuckle sandwich, but it's like, you can't do that either. But I just, they don't get a clue. They don't have an idea of what we do, man. People that walk in with, say, a trumpet or, anything small, they really don't get what we do. They don't see all the back stuff that we have to do.
The thing that I always say is that anything that anyone doesn't want to play, they just hand it back to us.
And we'll gladly
and we
take
just
it.
do it, you know? I mean,
That's what we do.
I mean, that's what we do. I mean, there are plenty of things that we've played on these shows that we've got no business, or it doesn't make sense that we play them, but we end up playing them because it's just one of those things. Whereas, like you said, somebody who's playing trumpet, somebody who's playing violin, that's all they have to worry about.
Yeah.
We're worried about trying to make it from one instrument to the next, you know? Right. Which kind of leads into the next thing, is that one thing that you and I have done a couple of different times is we've gotten our setups set up a certain way. And there's been times where you've had to say, hey, man, I need you on this. There's something that's going on here, and I know that you've got a moment before you have to play something. Can you run over here and do this? And one thing that I think that's incredibly important regarding that is, again, the setup of being able to get from one place to the next on that. But also the other thing is of course, the trust that we have between us as players, to where you know that I can run over and play that bell lick or hit that temp note or something like that. But you also had enough foresight, man, to go through and look and go, you know what? Now here's a section. Here's a little thing that it just doesn't make sense for me to tape a bunch of mallets together. You know, he's got a few bars to reach over and do that. So the whole point that I'm making here is percussion and drum set, they need to work together hand in hand on this type thing, because they're going to be able to mutually help each other out. Because I know also, man, there was a time on one show that we did where I had a tam-tam, it was behind me, but we had it worked out to where you could play it also,
Right. Yep.
if need be, on that stuff.
Yep.
So get that set up and get that communication simpatico on that kind of stuff.
Good to have buddies in the pit with you, for sure.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Now, I'm going to ask you the $1 million question here, because you do this significantly more than I do.
Okay.
How do you go about learning a conductor's tendencies from the standpoint of knowing where that sharp downbeat is? Because for us, man, there's no place to hide. If you've got a staccato downbeat, you gotta go.
Right.
What's your secret, man?
I mean, you have to be a fast read, right?
Yeah.
And you'll know, hopefully a show conductor has a really pointed ictus where you know, because they have to. I mean, you would hope that they would have to. I've played for some really terrific conductors. Orchestrally, you're not sure what you're going to get. I mean, when I was really young, I got to play quite a bit with Robert Shaw in the Atlanta Symphony. And I started with them, like, I'm not quite sure I had turned 18 yet. Maybe I had, and I was playing, I'll never forget this moment, because leading to your point, I mean, I was nervous, certainly, but I was playing bass drum, and I was trying to play downbeats. Just imagine somebody every downbeat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and I was early on every downbeat because I'm watching him like a hawk, like we're all trained to watch, and of course I'm early, and it felt very awkward. I was guessing then to play in time. I was guessing, and I remember Billy Wilder beside me. He leaned over and he says, on those downbeats, watch his right elbow. And when that reaches its highest point, that's your downbeat. No matter what his hand is doing with that baton in it, boom. And I said, his right elbow? He said, watch his right elbow. When that reaches its highest, he repeated exactly. Okay. So he did it, the right elbow, and I played where it highest point perfectly on the downbeat, and it was that way from then on. I'm like, oh my gosh. So learning stuff like that, or getting somebody to nicely tell you that you're wrong on every single note until you watch that right elbow, and then by golly, I was on. So if you can read a conductor pretty fast, you know, and know even from the overture downbeat what's going down. Oh, he conducts ahead of the beat, or oh my gosh, we've got to figure out how to resolve all this, and the downbeat's going to be, you know, just take a breath with the winds, and there you go. It's like you can figure it out if you're wide open, but it can be treacherous, right?
Oh, it's the bane of my existence when it comes to playing those kind of gigs. We've been fortunate, though, on a few other gigs that we've done that are not the Broadway things, that we've had a couple of really good conductors for like some certain church gigs, and then some certain recording sessions that we've done. We've had some guys that were really, they were very sympathetic, I think is probably the best way to say it, from the standpoint of that they knew that we, we've got sharp attack instruments, that we've got to know where that downbeat is. Right. To set the tempo reference. So.
I remember my timpani, all of my teachers' teacher, Cloyd Duff in Cleveland. Yeah. I remember writing my book one time. You have to breathe with the winds. You have to breathe with them because everyone's breathing, right? Mm-hmm. So in our instruments speak exactly. And I remember writing in one of the parts, I think it was something Brahms, and he says, and it was a single note, like a C, and he says, don't be early here, breathe. Let the second bassoon be early. They're always early. No offense to second bassoonists, but that's written in my part. Let the second bassoonists come in because they're always like, and they come straight in, and you just wait for everybody else and take the breath and boom, So early is wrong, as we know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's might as well be standing naked in front of everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
When you have
We've been there a few times.
Oh, yeah.
Good night. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to throw one drum set thing out to the drum set folks really quickly that I think is incredibly important. And it has to do not only working with the percussionist, but it has to do with working with everyone else in the orchestra or in the band as well. And that is, there is a modicum of interpretation that we are allowed or that we are given as drum set players that not all the time every single note is written out, even in the Broadway scores, even though they do a pretty good job a lot of times of really nailing stuff down and saying, we need this here and we need that there. And where I'm going with this is be sympathetic to the other folks, because you, John, every note is dictated for you, man. And that's 99% of the time, every note is dictated.
Yeah, we're not improvising at all.
Right.
There.
And same thing with the other instruments in there.
Right.
So I always tell all of my students when they're getting ready to do something like that is be aware of that. Be a little bit malleable with your parts when it comes to making things that are going to fit and sound good. And above all, the other thing is don't obliterate everyone with your dynamics, or more importantly, just your overall volume. Because it's a well-known fact that anytime you're in a situation where a drum set player and a percussionist are playing together, for lack of a better terms, we're setting the dynamic level the majority of the time.
Right. I remember having a lesson with Mr. Duff, if we jump back to him, and he talked about a pretty loud passage. He says, well, right here, you could be an adversary or a colleague.
Oh, that's
your
good.
Choice.
That's
and
good.
It's like, I would suggest maybe being a colleague here. Be a blend factor. We could take them out, but this is not that spot. You know what I mean? It was like, wow. And you always get to make that choice, doing drum set or doing the big percussion instruments. I remember playing ASO one time, Mahler 1 on bass drum. The sound guy came down to me and he said, "This is Fred Horton." He says, "Could you please come early tomorrow?" I said, "Sure, Fred, why?" He says, "That really large bass drum hit in the first movement." I said, "Yes." He says, "I need to set all of the recording levels on that one note, because when you hit that, everyone on stage disappears."
Interesting.
For a little while. I said, "Sure." So he set the dials. This is back in the day. Of course, they could figure all that stuff out now without having... But I came in early the next morning, man, and hit several large bass drum notes, and he was up in the booth, and he gave me the thumbs up. "Gotcha. Thanks, man." He set all the levels, so when that part came in the actual, concert, that everyone wouldn't be obliterated. And not my fault. That's Mahler's fault, because he wrote a big note there. But it's funny how much sonic boom our instruments have, as far as taking people orally right off the stage,
You heard it here, folks. John Lawless laid the blame on Gustav Mahler.
Wow. Thanks, Phil.
It's a first for this podcast, man. That's
Is it really?
It's a first that Gustav Mahler has been blamed for volume and dynamics.
I mean, there's some Mahler that I can even think about and get chill bumps. That's some pretty powerful music. You know what I mean?
Oh,
like
yeah.
Resurrection. I can't even imagine that symphony. I've played it. I've played every part in it, luckily, and I've been in performances, and I can't even think about it without getting chills. There's moments in music where it's just like, oh, geez.
There's one particular legit piece, man, orchestral piece, that just slaughters me, slays me every single time. Bartók Concerto for Orchestra.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Jack Bell and I had quite a conversation about that.
I bet.
Yeah, he was talking about playing that piece. I think he said he played it 14 nights in a row on a. It was the ASO had some sort of a European
The big
tour.
Yeah. I was not on
they
that one,
did.
but yeah.
And we were talking about him playing that snare drum at the beginning of the second movement.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you know about that? Do you know about that piece?
I am willing to learn, and
You
so
ready
is
for
our
this, man?
audience. Go
you ready
for
for
it.
this? Okay, this may or may not entice the audience. I'm sorry if it doesn't.
I like it, and that's all that matters right now, John.
I caught. So what Phil's talking about is that dum, dum, dum. Okay, and it snares off.
Right.
Okay, and it starts that precedes the bassoon leg.
Right.
So I saw this documentary one time back in the day, Arts and Entertainment. It was called Life with an Orchestra, and they were with London Symphony, and they did a whole thing on different composers. Well, this was on Bartók, and they showed Bartók in Hungary, recording on the reels, reel recording some of the Hungarian folk songs, and they were spinning off this piece that was commissioned, blah 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 blah, the concerto, and they started talking about this idea of where he found the components for this piece, and lo and behold, man, they played the first movement, and then when they got to the second movement, they shot the camera to this little teeny church in Hungary on this hill, and this guy walks out in traditional Hungarian garb. Of course, he was Hungary in a traditional church, so of course he's wearing traditional garb. He had 2 wooden hammers, and there was a huge wooden plank, and that was the church call, like the bell, but it was a big slab of wood. He goes, kick, get, and all the people in that area knew that it was time for church. And he went from that picture of this traditional Hungarian wooden hammers on a wooden plank, and they showed the next camera shot was da, 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 da. And it's like, oh, that was his total inspiration for that beginning of the movement, was this church plank. Is that cool?
That is incredible.
Is that cool?
And
Yeah.
now I'm going to ask you a total geek out percussionist question. When you play that part, do you play it with 1 stick or 2?
Both.
Okay.
So 2, but 1 stick. Okay, 1 stick for all the accents, and the other stick for all the running notes.
Gotcha.
So accent, da da da, da 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 da. So now all the accents are consistent, right? And all the small notes are consistent.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's pretty traditional, really.
Yeah. Interesting, man. So now we've gotten completely and totally into the wormhole on this, which
So shows.
yeah. So now let's go into section 3, which is performances.
Okay.
Okay. Because now we've practiced, we've loaded in, we've rehearsed, and now it's time to actually do a performance. Now, one of the things that I do, and I've been doing it for a long time, is I literally mentally run through the show before we sit down and play. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of those things that it helps me in a couple of different ways. It's, of course, practice, but the other thing is I like to think that it sets me up for success. I'm hearing it correctly in my head whenever we're playing. Mm-hmm. And so being able to mentally prepare for that kind of thing, you don't even have to be near your instrument when you do that. Right. So do you practice any sort of thing like that?
Always, yeah. And one of my dear friends, Bill Wilder, I mentioned him earlier, especially if it's something pretty hard. You'll see Bill, he'll get to the hall about an hour early. This is Atlanta Symphony. He's been there for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And you'll see him not playing anything, but he'll have his book either sitting behind the instrument or at the instrument and just flipping pages, every page. What's coming up? What's coming up? What's coming up? So there's no like, oh gosh, that was like hours ago. No, he's looking at every single page. And again, especially if it's hard, you won't see him just hanging out, talking backstage. He's looking and mentally goes through every single note, goes back to the beginning, and he's ready to rock. So yeah, I totally do that, man. Absolutely. You have to. I mean, there's so much involved with the show, right? I mean, for me, a lot of it's like, are these sticks in the right spot? How did I leave myself after yesterday's run or yesterday's rehearsal or whatever? Is everything in place? You got to take that like flight check.
Well, one of the things I also do is anything that I have to deal with that's not necessarily directly related to the music, but is important to the show, such as like dress, I always make sure I have that stuff set out the day of or the day before, to where, again, like you said, you do the flight check, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, I got my pit black here. I'm ready to go for this. If I need this, that, or the other, I make sure that I put all that stuff on the list just to do the idiot check.
You just mentioned it, lists. I'm a list person, and
me too.
It's ridiculous for some to see us go through our list things, but everything's on a list, man. I had a list to come see you today. It was on my list. If it weren't, I'd probably still come see you, but I have to put it up. I knew someone that my dean at Kennesaw, she asked if we were list people in one of her first talks with the faculty. She says, anybody else a list person out there? And of course, most of us raise our hands. She says, I'm such a list person. If I do something that wasn't on my list, I'll put it on the list just so I can check it off. I'm like, I've done that.
I have too. That's pretty funny.
You feel that accomplishment, like, oh, wait a minute, I did that. I better put that on the list and then check it off, like, immediately. But yeah, man, if I have all that stuff on a list, all that stuff, clothes, shoes, belt, don't leave anything out, because that'll be the thing you walk out without.
Right. That's the brain dead stuff, because you're so focused on doing a good job from a performance standpoint that a lot of times these little things like we're talking about that are important to the show, not necessarily to the music, that kind of stuff gets noticed just as much, man, by, conductors and other people who are part of these shows as if you nail that lick in there. So it's important, man, that you do have that list and make sure you check all those boxes and dot all those I's and cross all those T's.
Well, I always carry 2 bow ties when I'm doing tuck stuff. And how many times do you think I've had to pull one out for a buddy that forgot their tie?
I've done the
almost
same thing.
Every time. Almost every time there's a tux being worn, someone's not going to have a tie. I always have an extra one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, another thing, and I'm going to give a very specific example for this, is the ability to be flexible and the ability to change, stick and move, be able to absolutely move at the drop of a hat. And the one thing that I like to talk about is we did one show, which I'm pretty sure this was ragtime, that it ran so close to the 3-hour mark, because we were contracted for 3-hour performances, that these contractors and these conductors do not want to go 1 minute over 3 hours, because you have to pay overtime,
and
right?
It's ugly, yeah.
And it's exactly right. Well, it's not ugly for us. I'll gladly go that extra 1 minute over to get paid for that. But, John, do you recall that at the end of every performance, depending on the amount of time that was left, the conductor had on popsicle sticks little signs that she would hold up and go, this is the short bows.
Oh my gosh, I do remember that.
This is the long bows.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Of course.
And there was no prepping for that.
Yeah. Well, and you're the one driving that boat, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of one of those things that all of a sudden you've played the last note and everybody's clapping out in the audience, and then 2 seconds later, sign comes up. Oh, I better switch that over. So I'm just saying to everyone, have your head on a swivel.
Yeah.
Because you never know when something unexpected is going to happen with that.
I think show playing like that is kind of the most on you'll ever be. And that seems weird, but there's so many variables, man. Like one that came through that comes to mind was Crazy for You, which most of the mallet parts were on mallet cat. And I didn't have much experience yet with mallet cat. So not only are you having to learn and play your notes appropriately, but you have to check all of the different number systems that are going to get you from vibraphone to chimes to... I had one moment, good night, where in Crazy for You, you have one patch on the mallet cat that was tuned bicycle pumps, okay?
Oh, boy.
So it's like... like 3 different notes on the mallet cat, but they were the patch. It was all Disney. The patch was tuned bicycle pumps, and I was messing around with it one day, like second show in, like before the show, and I missed my setting by 1 number, and it was explosions. It went from cute bicycle pumps to like, now I'm nervous. Like if I miss by 1 number, I'm exploding the stage instead of like these cute bicycle pumps while they're dancing and doing these mimic bicycle things. It's like, good heavens, that's pressure all aside from everything else. Now you have that thing added on there. Like, what if you malfunction on something electronic or... Oh, man. So, I mean, you're wide open, lights on the whole time, with those things.
I agree, because I recall also that, especially when you finish your first few nights of that, the sense of accomplishment is only eclipsed by the sense of relief.
Right. Exactly.
And it's a good thing because you are, like you said, man, your eyes and ears are wide open, that entire thing. You are hypersensitive to any little thing that happens.
Yeah. And something's going to go out. Something's going to go wrong.
It's absolutely inevitable that something's going to go wrong somewhere through there. I think one of the biggest pitfalls is a lot of times, you might have a great opening night, better than you ever thought. You get a little confident in the second night.
Wednesday,
not quite as good.
Yeah.
John, you taught me something, man, on one of those shows.
What's that?
I can't remember, man. I can't remember if it was at the Fox or if we were somewhere else, man. But it was an incredibly valuable lesson. I came in one day, and you had been there for a few minutes, and you had a practice pad over, and you were warming up on a practice pad, and then you had some mallets. You were warming up on mallets, and they were like silent mallets, like warm. And I just thought, this guy over here knows something. And sure enough, what you were doing is you were flat out warming up and working on some hot spots in those parts. But yet you were being incredibly respectful to everyone else that was getting there in the pit, and even people who were milling about on stage and the stagehands and stuff. So being able to practice and warm up in a very respectful manner on something like that, I don't think that should be lost on everyone, because nobody wants to hear your tam-tam rolls.
Right.
30 minutes prior to rehearsal. So be respectful with your warm-up.
That's a big thing. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Because, I mean, you'd be surprised, like, no offense, but piccolo players that don't get that routine, that will come in and just start blowing high notes, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people don't want to hear you do that. You're right. So, quieter the better.
A quick side note to that, you also showed me the cheating way to play rip-roaring fast flams.
Wow, man.
You did this whole thing where I was watching you play these flams, and I was like, good Lord, Lawless, what is going on? You go, oh, man, this is easy. All I'm doing is playing doubles and getting one hand a little bit off.
I got 2 words for you.
What?
Randy Wickstrom.
Oh, he's the guy that came up with that?
Randy.
Oh, that's brilliant, though, man.
Yeah, Randy. He was, what did he place that year? Maybe 3rd in individuals back in 79, I think. And we were in the middle of nowhere, Kansas. Tumbleweeds rolling by, man. He's playing his solo, and I'm watching him, listening to him. And he played this flam thing. And I said, were those flams? He goes, yeah, these are easy, man. These are floppies. And he showed me how to do it. And I'm like, holy cow. I mean, because we all try just to stick them out,
right,
as fast as you can till you just lose your mind. And he showed me in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, man. So yeah, I probably showed you what he showed me.
You probably did, and I'll tell you this: it's just stupid if I sit here and told you how many people I've showed that, because anytime I've ever played those really quickly, and somebody goes, "What in the world? How are you doing that?" Because it's so stupidly easy once you kind of learn it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, John, we're about to power this thing down, man. We've covered a lot of good stuff in here, all the way from the very beginnings of starting to work together, all the way up to going through performances and finishing up. Right. And the last thing that I kind of want to leave everyone with, and then I'll, if anything you want to talk about, feel free to do afterwards, is the overall governing thing when you get to the point of the performances. And you've done a good job with preparing, and you could have done a good job with rehearsing, is don't be a numbskull and blow it by either being irresponsible or being rude. And what I mean by being irresponsible, for example, don't be late. Mm-hmm. When you're on intermission, don't be late getting back, because, man, that's happened before, where things have gotten held up slightly because somebody was a numbskull, and then all of a sudden they went outside and couldn't get back in, and it took a second, for everybody to get back in place, and it stops the show. Just don't be an idiot. Be responsible. You've got everything down then. Now just have some personal responsibility and do the right thing. Be responsible for your time. Be courteous of others. And then the part about not being, a rude ass. John, you were not on this show, but I did a series of shows several years ago with the Alabama Symphony Orchestra. That orchestra's based in Birmingham. Mm-hmm. and they had called me over to play drum set for, I'll leave her name out of it, but for a very famous vocalist, and she had brought her conductor in, and the conductor very admittedly was not used to conducting an orchestra. He was basically her accompanist as a piano player, but he could conduct some, right? Well, the orchestra was having none of it, and they were just not happy with this guy and weren't willing to work with him, is the main thing that I want to get at here. And it basically ruined that entire weekend. It was so bad that the next day before the performance, they had to call the president of the musicians union in, and there had to be basically a mediation prior to sound check to just keep everybody civilized, because it got that bad. And so that's what I'm talking about, folks. Don't be a jackass when you get in there. Sure, you're going to have some differences with the conductor. You're going to have some differences with that piccolo player blowing triple high C's in your ear, right? But, put yourself in their shoes. Try to just speak to their rational side, and you'll be better off for it.
Yeah. I tell students, and I tell myself all the time, don't burn a bridge. I mean, you don't want to be that person. You don't know how small our world is, the music world, until it's probably too late, really. If you've done things like that, you'll get a call one day from someone whom you could have been, a horse's patootie, and weren't. And that call will come around, and you'll be like, man, am I glad I didn't say what was on my mind that day 15 years ago, If you could hold back on that and just know that we're all in this world, it's one big thing, it's spinning, and we're all sitting there on it. You don't know who knows who out there. And many countless times, I've bit my tongue. Not that I really get angry that much, but there's times I don't go there, man. I don't do that, holier than thou routine. I'll keep quiet, more times than not, and thankfully, because you may have had a different perception of what they really intended, where you're about to lose a gasket on it, where they didn't mean that at all. That's just their personality. And had you gone off, you know what I mean? That relationship is hurt at that point, no matter what. That's what they'll remember from you in 10 years. And somebody says, hey, good percussionist? Yeah, I know someone,
Well, two quick things that I will embolden your point on is essentially talking about the microscopic grapevine that is the musician's grapevine. I've kind of figured out from doing this show primarily, there's virtually no drummer or percussionist that's more than 1 degree or 2 degrees, I guess it would be, of separation away from me. In other words, just knowing as many people as I know from doing this for 30 years, there's virtually no one, and I'm talking about guys like Steve, Gadd, Vinny Colaiuta, that I'm not more than one separation of contact, one phone call away from. So yeah, you absolutely have to keep that in mind, because let me tell you, you can do 500 great things, but then you do that one stinker, and all of a sudden it'll take you 2 years to get back to where you were.
Right, no question.
And then the second thing I wanted to say is this. I heard a very wise man tell me one time when some guy was being a knucklehead, and he had been warned a couple of times, like, man, you just take it easy on this, man. It's going to be okay. And the guy continued to be a knucklehead, and the wise man leaned over to me and he goes, here's your example of here's a guy that's not going to learn until he loses the gig. Now, that's a shame, but that's the thing. You need to learn before you lose the gig.
I tell also a lot of people, I have a lot of contact with students, so I'll tell them sometimes, you may not get from some people the best lesson of how to play, how to act, how to be, but by some people's actions, you'll see how not to act, how not to play, and how not to be. And there's your lesson. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, yeah, okay, that's who I don't want to be, so I'll be this person, right?
Yeah.
And you see that, like the whole scene over there. You know how not to treat an artist or a conductor.
Exactly.
From what went down with that. So yeah, I've had people close to me that I'm figuring out, okay, well, the lesson learned there was how not to treat people, right?
Sure.
And go with that and treat them how you think they ought to be treated. And that always comes back in spades. I mean, always comes back, personifying.
John, can you believe that earlier today you were like, I'm not exactly sure that we've got enough stuff to talk about. And did you know we've been going for over an hour?
Crazy. Well, we could have done that without a microphone, too,
That's
by
true.
the way.
We could have. But I think we gave some folks some things to think about today.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, because we can draw from our experiences and some of our different modes of preparation and performance that a lot of folks just don't have it, but would like to have it. So,
I hope we get to do some stuff again.
I hope so, too. It's been a
We
minute.
have to create something. We have to have a show written for us, man. That's what we need.
You know what we need to do, man? You and I need to do the Sari together, that duo, that percussion duo thing. You remember that?
I do.
We need to do that. I did that one time with our esteemed friend, Dr. Monty Coulter. We had a blast.
How I met you first.
That's exactly correct.
I had not even really met you. And he said, dude, there's a guy you got to meet.
And he just left it at that. There's a guy you gotta meet. John, thanks so much, man, for coming over and being a part of this show. It's been an absolute joy. We're going to have you on here some more.
Okay.
And little did you know, but you have now been drafted as a de facto member of the Drummers Weekly Groovecast Advisory Board. You are
a proud card-carrying member.
You are in the
Thanks.
esteemed company of some folks like Joel Rosenblatt, Tom Brackline, Jack
Bell.
Yeah.
My man.
Yeah. So, man, we are glad to have you on board, even though you didn't know you were. So we're going to call upon you again, man, to drop some knowledge on our folks out here.
Be a pleasure.
Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. We appreciate you tuning in every Monday. As you know, we have new shows that come out every Monday, feature shows. You can find us on iTunes, Google Play Podcast, Stitcher, Podbean, basically anywhere that you access your podcasts. If you can't find us, one, you're not looking hard enough. And two, if you can't find us, make sure you get in touch with us. Now, you can get in touch with us at our website. We're at drummersweeklygroovecast.com. There you can find all of our episodes. You can find all of our videos. You can find all of our social media contact, our email forms, all that good stuff. So make sure you go over and visit when you get a minute. Last but not least, for those of you who listen on iTunes or at least even have an iTunes account, the next time you log into iTunes, do us a solid. Run by our webpage, or our homepage, I should say, inside of iTunes, and leave us a quick written review. It really helps us a lot from the standpoint of allowing other folks who are looking for this type of content to find us. We relate more to other shows of the same ilk, and therefore it just grows and gets better. And then the Drummers Weekly Groovecast is not the only inside joke that you're in on. Everybody else is in on it. All right, that's going to do it for this week. John, say goodbye to the good folks out there.
Goodbye, everybody.
We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.